Attack on Titan is said to be a modern masterpiece, surpassing the stigma that surrounds most anime series and making it into the mainstream zeitgeist. The reason for this is clearly discernible through the viewing of just the first 2 or 3 episodes. In the first few episodes, Hajime Isayama was able to create a gripping story of 3 children living within enormous walls to escape the giants called Titans lurking just outside. The fear and disbelief one feels during the first 2 episodes, where the outermost and second walls fall to the massive creatures, is only possible due to Isayama's great understanding of emotions and the feeling of absolute dread that we see every character the camera pans on exhibiting. Later on in the series, we go through many twists and turns within the plot, leading to one of the most shocking and unexpected plot twists in the history of not only anime, but cinema in general. And today, I'm going to talk all about it. Lock in, folks. This is gonna be a very long video. Before we get into that, hi! My name is Avery, and here on my YouTube channel, I usually nerd out about whatever is on my mind when I start writing my scripts, while a video of me drawing plays in the background. And today, ladies and gentlemen and friends in between, I'm gonna put my degrees to work. Not only am I using my animation degree to tell you about the subtle details in angling, filmmaking, and cinematography, but I'm also using my German degree to explain why Attack on Titan is not anti-Semitic, but it is in fact a warning against fascist ideology using some of the very same techniques that Hitler, Goebbels, and Leni Riefenstahl used to brainwash an entire country into believing everyone else was the problem, not unlike Japan itself was doing in East Asia at the time. Spoiler warning for literally all of Attack on Titan. You have been warned. Like and subscribe, by the way. Follow my socials down below for updates, and let's get on to the video. Okay, so what is Attack on Titan? Well, it's a manga that started in 2009 by Hajime Isayama and ended in April of 2021. Isayama was only 19 years old when he started writing the story, and even in the early days, while his art was very subpar, his writing was near perfect. This story was never meant to be a series, according to Yams himself. Yams is what we call Isayama, affectionately. But after the success of the manga and then the anime, which started airing in 2013, Isayama decided to make the story longer and thus that much more impactful. Overnight, Isayama went from a poor college student to having his bank call him with suspicions of fraudulent behavior because so much money started hitting his account all at once. The story goes, Isayama grew up in Hita, which is a city in Japan surrounded by mountains. So much so that they inspired in the young man a story about a boy who longed to see what was over the massive wall he was never able to see the other side of. The Titans came about because while in a coffee shop, one of the customers looked creepy, which gave Isayama the idea of massive man-eating giants. He never really talks about the mythologies his characters and world building are based around, which as a fellow creative drives me fucking mad, because I want to know how and why he decided to mix together Scandinavian and medieval German cultures to create the lore of his own world. You see, Titans are giants from multiple polytheistic mythologies, though in this instance, Isayama was specifically using Scandinavian folktales as his reference, and we can infer this just by looking at the aesthetics and the names of the characters the lore revolves around. I'm getting a little ahead of myself here. Let me tell you the plot and summarize it the absolute best I can. Eren Yeager is our main character, although already we can make an argument against this, but I'll save that for later. Instead, I'll just say we have 3 main characters. Eren Yeager, who the story is about, Mikasa Ackerman, whose story we follow, and Armin Arlert, who narrates it all. Eren has always wanted to escape the walls that surround him. However, the walls are supposedly meant to protect him and the last remnants of humanity from man-eating giants called Titans. Nobody knows why they exist, how they keep multiplying because they don't have genitals, or why they specifically feed on humans because they don't need to eat. They just do. Our trio lives in the outermost district of the walled society called Shiganshina. While going about their normal day, their lives are suddenly torn apart when a Titan manifests out of nowhere, 10 meters taller than the 50-meter wall, and kicks down the only entry and exit point to the outside world. The Titans come pouring in, devouring everyone in sight with absolutely no discrimination. The population of the city flees to the innermost walls for refuge, but on their way through, another Titan, one covered in armor-like casing, destroys the gate to the first wall, Maria. This is where the first defining moment of the series happens. Not the fall of Wall Maria, but the death of Eren's mother by the Smiling Titan. On the refugee boat, he declares that he will bring an end to all Titans. The first half of season 1 basically shows us what life was like for the trio after the fall of Wall Maria. The difficulties they endured, more losses, the hit to humanity's population, the training days of the children who signed up to become part of the world's military, how this show's world runs, and the very first battle our main characters are forced into fighting. The main things you need to know is this. Take notes, folks. Grisha Yeager, Aaron's father, has been missing since the fall of the outermost wall. The trio joined the military cadet corps in order to become scouts of the survey corps in order to fight the Titans directly. The colossal Titan appears from nowhere near the end of the cadets' training to punch another hole in the Trost district, the outermost district of Wall Rose. The cadets are sent to fight the Titans within the Trost district, which leads to many deaths. Aaron saves Armin from being devoured by a Titan, then is assumed dead for multiple episodes. An odd abnormal Titan appears during the battle that's seen fighting the other Titans. This Titan turns out to be Aaron. Yes, you heard that right. Aaron is revealed to be a Titan himself and can transform at will. Aaron then uses his abilities for a plan Armin comes up with to seal the hole in Trost District, finally allowing humanity to win its first battle against the Titans. On second thought, that was a lot of information being thrown at you, but it's the best way I could think of to summarize what was happening. I think now is a good time to take a break and learn a little bit about the world of Attack on Titan. Humanity is forced behind 3 giant walls to protect themselves from the cannibalistic Titans. Titans are especially dangerous because, as humanity has studied them, it is learned that Titans never gain or lose weight, they have no genitals but somehow keep multiplying, and they don't need to eat to live. Once a Titan has eaten too many humans, it barfs up a nasty ball of remains in different states of decomposition to make room for more humans. This means that Titans, logically, shouldn't exist. They aren't a part of the food chain, and they regenerate when injured, unless you cut the napes of their necks at specific measurements to kill it. Back to the walls. These walls cover enormous amounts of land. So large, in fact, that it even contains mountains, rivers, lakes, and forests. The 3 walls, from outermost to innermost, are Maria, Rose, and Cena, and each of them have 4 outlier districts specifically made to attract Titans in cases of emergencies. Examples of these outlier districts include Orvid in Wall Cena, Trost in Wall Rose, and Shigashina in Wall Maria. Each wall is supposedly named after one member of a trio of sisters, though the why for that is unknown until near the middle of the series. Within the 3 walls is a strict government. In fact, now is the time to move on to an entirely different section. The society within the 3 walls is strictly governed by a monarchy, which seemingly holds absolute power over its citizens. We don't get a good look into the government until season 2 and especially season 3. We do, however, get some look into how the government works in season 1. In fact, the government of this society is pretty much authoritarian. It's an absolute monarchy in which the head of the royal family, the king, has complete control over which laws are enacted, the moves the military is allowed to make, and what the lords of the land can and cannot do. When we start the series, we learn that Aaron and Armin had been reading a book about the outside world since they were very young. We learn a little bit later that this book is illegal and could get them in a lot of trouble if the government found out they had it. We also learn that Armin's parents died trying to fly a hot air balloon over the wall to see the other side. It's insinuated early in the series that talk of exploring the outside world and any materials involving it are strictly regulated and illegal for citizens to own because it inspires rebellion in the population. If there's a world outside the walls, beyond the Titans, then why would they not want to explore it and possibly wipe out the Titans to get to it? This is where the military comes in. The military of this world is divided into 3 branches. The military police, which is exactly what it sounds like, a brigade of military personnel tasked with keeping citizens in check and enforcing the law, the garrison regiment, tasked with protecting and maintaining the walls, and a survey corps, or scouting legion, a group of dedicated soldiers who give up their lives in the fight against the Titans, usually ending in mass casualty, and the slim chance that even a tiny amount of new information discovered about the Titans, what they are, and about the outside world. The Survey Corps is kind of like the government's enemy. Everything they stand for is against what the military tells its citizens to go against. The Scouts fight for the freedom of knowledge and to look beyond the walls. They fight for freedom and help humanity prosper. However, as I stated earlier, because they go outside the walls and fight Titans, massive casualties ensue. This makes the Scouts the least favored, least funded, and least popular branch of the military. Very few cadets decide to join simply to preserve their own lives. Joining the military, like in real life, at least in the US, has its pros and cons. If your family is poor, you can make a decent living by joining the military, which means you can provide for yourself and your family. If you're lucky enough to find yourself in the top 10 of your graduating cadet class, then you have have the opportunity to join the military police without having to work your way up the ranks. Getting into the military police gets you the best salary of the 3 branches, and it can get you a cushy life in the capital of Walsina, which is both the innermost wall and where the wealthiest and most important people live. On the other hand, joining the military means you're more controlled by the government than the average citizen. Sure, you get more perks the further up the ranks you go, but you're also more surveilled than your peers. This leads to intense power dynamics between the government and the military and the citizens. Near the end of season 1, we witness that the higher-ups of the military police tend to keep their heads down and not take their job too seriously. The nobles give them their commands, and unless that's happening, the MPs don't do much of anything other than regular patrols. Let's move on to seasons 2 and 3 before we continue with how much power the government truly has over this society. Season 2, which came out 4 years after the first season, an anomaly for anime back then, focuses more on the mystery of the Titans and whatever the government could be hiding. It's much slower paced than the first season, and has much more focus on the characters we had barely heard from previously. The characters we follow are mostly split into 2 groups: our main trio, Levi, Hanji, and a man named Pastor Nick, and Squad Mike, Connie, Bertold, Reina, Emir, and Krista. Sasha goes solo for a little while and gets her own mini arc, and we're not really going to talk about that. Anyways, after discovery of the Titans in the walls, a priest, Pastor Nick, urges Hanji and her squad to cover the Titan, but refuses to give up information even after Hanji threatens his life. There's also a threat of a hole in Wall Rose, meaning some Titans have been spotted. It's here that we see humanity's strongest soldier, Mike Zacharias, go off to take down the small horde on his own. Not a dangerous task for him until he comes face to face with a giant, hairy, monkey-looking Titan who can speak. The beast takes Mike's ODM gear and kills him. We then follow the secondary cast as they go with the rest of Squad Mike to try and locate the hole in the wall. They never find it, and are forced to take shelter in an abandoned castle. Then, they're overrun by Titans, which kill the remnants of Squad Mike. Before the tower they're on collapses, however, Emir reveals that she's a Titan as well, and saves the rest of the group from the Titans before the Survey Corps shows up to clean up the rest of the horde. It's here that a seemingly insignificant piece of information is dropped. Krista tells Emir that her real name is Historia. This is important for later. The scouts all regroup on top of Wall Rose and try to come up with a reason for why there were Titans in Wall Rose, despite there being no entry point for them. As they talk, Reina and Bertold hold Eren back to make a confession, the second big plot twist of the series. Reina is the Armor Titan, and Bertold is the Colossal. Eren's disbelief leads a desperate Reina to fight Eren in their Titan forms, leading to Emir and Eren being kidnapped by Bert and Reina. The scouts then set off to rescue them, and this ends with Eren being saved and Emir willingly running off with Reina and Bertold. See, season 2 is the shortest season in the entire series, and also the slowest, but it's packed with so much information you literally cannot skip it, and I just mentioned the necessary parts. Season 3 is where everything changes completely. After the events of season 2, a lot happens. The most basic and short summary I can come up with is that the government is alive. The King of the Walls is just a puppet for the true royal family to use. Historia is now the sole heir to the throne, and Erwin overthrows the government in favor of Historia's lead and the military. Along the way, we learn a few key things. Grisha Jaeger was a Titan shifter and used his power to take the royal family's Titan shifter for himself, along with killing the rest except for Rod Rice, the bastard father of Historia. In order to inherit Titan powers, one has to be turned into a pure Titan and devour the current holder of the power by ingesting that person's spinal fluid. In short, Grisha Jaeger is dead. We also learn that coming into contact with an individual with royal blood activates the powers of the Titan Grisha stole from the royal family. We also learn that the government had been kidnapping and torturing citizens who were deemed a threat to the way of life within the walls. Some of these individuals include Erwin's father, a teacher who taught his son the theories he had about the outside world, Armin's parents for trying to fly over the walls in a hot air balloon, and Historia's mother, who they were afraid would yap about having Rod Rice's child and being his former mistress. The second part of season 3 focuses on the battle to retake Wall Maria. It's kind of hard to summarize it since it's the most strategy-based storyline we've had since season 1, but basically it's Clash of the Titans 2.0. The important things you need to know are this. We are introduced to another Titan shifter, the Cart Titan. We learn more about the Beast Titan, and we get hints about Reina and Bert's homeland. The most important information you need to know is that eventually the battle ends with all but 9 soldiers dead. You see, the battle took a lot of sacrifice. Erwin led a suicide charge against the Beast Titan to distract him for Levi to get close enough to bring him down, and Armin sacrificed himself long enough for Eren to bring down Bertold. This culminated in a standstill, where having only one injection to turn someone into a pure titan and steal the shifting power from one of the enemies, there was a fight about who to save. The brains of the operations that were successful so far, or the successful and genius strategic mind that led the others to victory. Erwin had entrusted this decision to Levi, and after a long and personal deliberation, Levi chose Armin. This made Hanji the next commander of the Survey Corps, Armin the inheritor of the Colossal Titan, and forever changed the dynamic of the characters in the show. After finally making it to the Jaeger's basement, the biggest plot twist of the show and in the history of cinema is revealed. From this moment on, everything changes. In the basement of the Jaeger home are 3 journals, and in these journals is the story of Grisha Jaeger. Revelations are made and the course of the show is forever altered, splitting the viewers of the show into multiple ideologies and revealing some rather interesting information for the general real-life public. Grisha Jaeger tells his tale in 3 journals. His tale about the outside world. The place we've come to know is not a vast land which holds the remnants of humanity behind 3 walls. It's an island known to the rest of the world as Paradis, the island of devils. And humanity exists outside the walls. Across the sea, an enemy lies in wait, seeking to destroy every single person on that island. Marley is a place always entrenched in war. On this continent was the beginnings of thousands of years of hatred for a single race of humans. Sound familiar? Ladies, gentlemen, and friends in between, we have entered a world of fascism. Marleyans despise and fear Eldians for something they can't control. Eldians are a race of people that, with the help of Titan spinal fluid, can turn into giant cannibals. Despite the disdain, Marley has been using Eldians as weapons for centuries, using their curse to turn into Titans to bring other nations to its knees. They discriminate against the Eldians, calling them slurs, locking them in ghettos, separated from the rest of society, imposing rules on them that are so strict it's easier to break than follow them, and if an Eldian disobeys, they're sent to Paradise, the island of devils, where they're turned into pure Titans and forced to roam the island in a nightmare state that is never ending. There is a way for Eldians to gain the title of honorary Marleyan, which grants them access outside of the ghetto and lets them have more luxuries than other Eldians, and that is by forcing their children to be child soldiers. These child soldiers are put through intense training, and the best candidates are to inherit one of the 9 Titans. Inheriting one of the 9 allows your family to live in a state of luxury not seen by other Eldian soldiers, guaranteeing them honorary Marleyan status even after your death, which, by the way, is 13 years after you first inherit one of the 9. This time period is such because the original Titan, a girl named Ymir Fritz, died 13 years after getting her Titan powers. Therefore, this lifespan limit is called the Curse of Ymir. For this particular video, the fantasy elements of the show aren't what I'm focused on. It's the blatant fascist imagery, references to the Nazi cinema and soldiers, and genocide. From here on out, that is what we'll be discussing. Intentional or not, I think a high amount of praise is due to the cinematographers, directors, and writers of the show, along with Hajime Isayama, for the research that must have gone into making the show look like a fascist dystopia from the end of season 3 to the end of the show. Fascist aesthetics were necessary, in my opinion, to bring attention to the themes of the show after the basement reveal. You see, fascism, especially German fascism, is a very visual aesthetic art form in a way. Sure, Hitler was able to convince an entire country to follow his ideas with his words, but part of the mindset was also looks. Looks were everything. Clean, monotone suits, dull and lifeless colors, large and grand buildings, clean haircuts and trimmed facial hair, perfect posture, polished boots, and not a hair out of line. These are all key to the visual aesthetics of fascism. It's why some people interested in politics side-eye the clean girl aesthetic and whatever the fuck Nara Smith is going on. Your appearance was important to your image as a follower of Adolf Hitler. It was also part of the brainwashing. You see, if Hitler had made his aesthetic something grimy and dirty, he wouldn't have been taken seriously. Therefore, it was absolutely necessary for him to look the part of a leader. And who was looked up to the most throughout history? Nobility. Clean and regal nobility. People who always appeared in public completely put together, with stiff postures and hair tied up so tight gymnasts would cringe. It was a very real threat that if someone was out of place as a soldier or a soldier's family member at the time, that you could be punished, and it wasn't just appearances. Your behavior was monitored. Children were to be completely obedient, women even more so. Obedience was key to looking the part. The one thing we won't touch on that was part of the Nazi aesthetic that just wasn't part of the Marleyan aesthetic is feminism and misogyny. It's something worth being studied, in my opinion. One of the important aspects of Nazism was keeping women in their place as breeding stock and homemakers. But Isayama's Attack on Titan has a lot of feminist undertones to it, that of which we will not be focusing on today. Anyways, the aesthetics we've come to know associated with Adolf Hitler's Nazi aesthetic are thanks to his buddy old pal Josef Goebbels, the lead propagandist for the party. Leni Riefenstahl, whose film Triumph of the Will, while being a Nazi propaganda film, is renowned for its beautiful and innovative cinematography. Hugo Boss, who made the clothing for the Nazis. Karl Diebitsch, who is responsible for the design of much of the SS regalia designs. And Walter Heck, who, along with Diebitsch, designed the infamous SS all-black uniforms. Without these people, Adolf Hitler wouldn't have been able to convince the public to go along with his insane ideology. Ergo, the visual aesthetics of the regime were just as important as the ideology that surrounded it. I think here is where Attack on Titan gets into the most trouble, honestly. It's one thing to have racism and Zionism depicted in your work, but to have all these aesthetics that still bruise an entire country to this day, that's a bit much for a lot of people to stomach. But you see, what's important about the Nazi imagery in Attack on Titan is exactly the way it makes you feel. Nothing gives you the feeling of pity quite like a character that's been through abuse by those they hold dear, or the blatant discrimination enacted through a government that no one can control. It was a massive controversy when the armbands were revealed, at least once we understood what they were for. I mean, Japan still uses armbands to distinguish club leaders in schools to this day, so a lot of people could brush it off as a bit of Japanese culture mixing with the European one. But once it was clear that the only ones wearing the armbands were a race of people, it became a discriminatory action and thus extremely offensive. But that's just the thing, right? People got offended at the mere mention and visualization of the discrimination of Jews in Nazi Europe. They didn't stop to think about the writer's intentions. What was Isayama trying to say? Where was he taking this ideology? Is he for or against it? Now, I think if you actually sit down and watch the show or read the manga, the message is clear. Marley was the big bad villain, at least until Eren decided the entire world, Eldian and not, had to pay for the discrimination of one singular island, but that's for later. Marley was using fear tactics, aesthetics, and racist rhetoric to keep control over a people they deemed collectively dangerous. Fear does nothing but rile people up. It makes people act irrationally, and irrationality is ultimately what causes discrimination. It introduced competitions that made Eldians directly compete with each other to see which handfuls would get to give them and their families a better life by shortening their own. Marley convinced the Eldians that they could receive special privileges if only they gave their lives to their tormentors as weapons in wars, which then get blamed on their race. It's a cycle that most Eldians never really tried to break free from due to their own fear of the rest of the world and the guilt that's been beaten into them from the moment they breathe their first breath. Can we get to the point of the video? I hear you ask from your screens. Sure, let's get into it. Is Attack on Titan itself anti-Semitic? Well, no, because while there's a lot of fascist imagery in the series, it doesn't automatically mean the show is anti-Semitic. If you think this, then what would you think about Schindler's List, The Pianist? The boy in the striped pajamas is technically more anti-Semitic than Attack on Titan is, but that's a different conversation. Just because there's imagery associated with the discrimination of the Jewish people does not make that media anti-Semitic. I think Isayama chose Nazi Germany and anti-Semitism because it's the world's oldest hatred. Everybody knows of the historical hatred for Jews, and thus it's the easiest way to portray needless ethnic hatred. It's probably the most documented blind hatred in the history of the world, at least relating to race and ethnicity. And you can correct me if I'm wrong about that, but you have to agree that it's probably the most well known. Most of the comments I've seen of people declaring Attack on Titan anti-Jewish and Hajime Isayama an anti-Semite is because the show depicts it at all. Apparently, having the victims of the series using actual historical events is now saying that that race of people who was victimized in real life and in the show they're alluded to are the bad guys. Therefore, Isayama is anti-Semitic. It's an extremely weak argument if you ask me. My assumption that they think this is the truth is based off of two things. One, that the primary villains of the show, Rhina, Bert, and Annie, are all from the internment zone in Marley, where they were the victims of a fascist regime and its brainwashing, which must mean the villains can't possibly be victims, right? The Jaegerists are Eldians, Jews, hell-bent on protecting their home and their people, even if that means wiping out the rest of the world, ignoring the fact that their masterminds, Zeke and Aaron, don't want that result at all. And despite my best efforts not to talk about or mention the Israel-Palestine war, I have to say there's a pretty good argument that could be made that the Jaegerists are Israelis and Paradis is Israel, which to some people would make Isayama anti-Semitic for the implication that the Jaegerists shouldn't want everyone to pay for their discrimination, but we aren't here to talk about those idiots. We're here to talk about these idiots. The ones who think the portrayal of an identifying armband for an entire race of people automatically means the creators of said media is racist, instead of the possibility that he maybe just wanted a simple way to portray the unwarranted and nonsensical discrimination of a people. Hear me out on this one, because this may sound anti-Semitic on my part, but I promise it's historically accurate. I think we can compare the Eldians being cannibalistic monsters analogy to the real life Jews control the media, banks, big companies, etc. because most Jewish hate does indeed come from the stereotype that Jews control those things. Ask a neo-Nazi why Jews should be eradicated, and they'll say it's because they have all the power. They control everything. This power is a threat to these idiots. I think Isayama uses Titans as this analogy to make it more clear from both perspectives. Think like an idiot for a second. I know, it's hard, but try. If there was a group of people who you believed had all the power in the world and could destroy anything and everything you hold dear with a snap of their fingers, wouldn't you be afraid of that power? Well, this is essentially how Nazis think. If one group of people supposedly has all the power, then they should be taken down. But if one of them can rise up, then they all will. So it's not as simple as taking down the most powerful, you have to take them all down. Now think about it from Marley's perspective about Eldians. You have this group of people who once ruled the world and had all the power specifically because of their ability to transform into powerful monsters. Their original hatred may very well be justified, but to take down their oppressors, they had to take down the ultra-powerful, then subjugate the rest to ensure permanent obedience, which then led to discrimination worldwide. We can even look at it as Eldians have always been oppressed for no discernible reason because the Eldian powers came from Ymir, who was enslaved by King Fritz. So these people were never once free. They've always been oppressed, but always powerful in some way. I think Isayama put a lot of care into making everyone seem both good and bad, at least among the Eldian cast. The warriors were first seen as the villains because we were viewing them from the lens of the scouts. They were these people who were working with the enemy, killing innocents, and therefore had to be completely evil, right? But then we learned that the warriors are oppressed themselves, having been brainwashed into thinking they're evil devils spawned simply for being born. That their entire people were already cursed, and therefore so are they. Their only value to the world was helping Marley dominate other countries, and for that, they were even more oppressed in areas outside of Marley. They were evil for wanting Paradis gone, but victims for the reason why. On the other hand, we can see the Eldians of Paradis as the enemies from the warriors' eyes because they were the reason for everyone's hatred. On the other hand, we can see the Eldians of Paradis as the enemies from the warriors' eyes because they were the reason for everyone's hatred. They're also the ones who were able to escape oppression and hide from discrimination on their island, living mostly free and peaceful lives away from those who wanted them dead. They're the cause for all other Eldians' pain. They're also the people who promised to destroy the world if their peace was ever interrupted, which makes them a danger to everyone else. After the Jaegerists emerge, the need to eradicate them seemingly rises, because the enemy is now openly planning an attack at least on Marley, if not the entire world. Both sides can be seen both ways, at least in the Eldians' cases, and even some in the rest of the world's discrimination toward the Eldians. But listen, just because the fear is understood and seen doesn't mean it's right. If all you've had is bad experiences with gay men, and you state to hate gay men, is it understandable? Sure, I can understand why you'd hate gay men, since every gay man you've ever come into contact with has given you a bad experience, but I'm not gonna say you're right for it, because not all gay men are the same. If everyone thought in the way a discriminatory person thought, then there wouldn't be friends between races or ethnicities or even countries or territories. We'd all keep to our own, and eventually we'd probably die out because no one is exactly the same, and that's what prejudice causes. It causes groups to get smaller and smaller because those people in the group will only ever want to interact with people just like themselves, which means eventually they'd probably just want to be alone. Maybe that's a stretch, you got me, but you can see my point. right? Isayama's portrayal of discrimination is fairly neutral, and his portrayal of Jews within the series is mostly from a victim's point of view. Everyone in the story has their reasons for doing something. It's not necessarily just blind hatred, but that also doesn't make the hatred justified. Taking away that nuance is like taking away the character's humanity. Everyone has good and bad in them. We can't just say someone is a completely good person. It's subjective. It's why Armin said what he did to Annie. So what's the conclusion? Of course, I can only state my opinion based on my own assessment of one of my favorite pieces of media. As I've learned in my German degree journey, everything's up to the consumer. Someone may look at a movie like, I don't know, Schindler's List, and see that Schindler was a Nazi and say he was a bad person because of that, even given the context of what he accomplished and how he used his privilege as a member of the Nazi Party to save Jews from being murdered because he employed them in his factories. Others, the majority hopefully, will say that Schindler was a good person because of all that. It's up to the person watching the movie. There are people who read Boy in the Striped Pajamas and say that it does much more harm than good for teaching children about the Holocaust. And then there's people like my mother who thought it was a realistic portrayal until I told her all of the flaws in the logic of the story. Perspective and opinion is key. So, is Attack on Titan anti-Semitic? No, I don't think so. But that's just my educated opinion. Truly, honestly, if you don't agree and you think it is anti-Semitic, please let me know in the comments below. Hopefully in a very non-accusatory, conversational way, because I would absolutely love to see the other side of this debate without slurs and accusations being thrown this way and that. Give me some in-depth reasoning too, not just what your opinion is, but also the why. Because to understand each other, we have to, what? Talk it out. Exactly. Good job. Have a star. I was gonna make a joke, but I don't think I should given the context of everything we just talked about. Thank you for watching it all if you did. This was kind of a passion project, which is why it came out so late. If you'd like to see me do more videos about Attack on Titan, for example, pointing out the specific fascist imagery within the series for the purpose of context clues and symbolism, if you would like more of my perspective on things such as World War II, Holocaust movies, or even propaganda films made by the Nazis, I would be thrilled to do it. Trust me, my favorite thing to do in school was take a film and analyze the shit out of it. My professor said those were his favorite assignments of mine to read. So give me suggestions in the comments below. Follow all my socials linked in the description, and stay tuned for a few announcements after this. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Holy shit, long video, but we're still not done. I think I'm actually working full time now, and I have a much more consistent work schedule. I'm going to lower my video amount once again. Last time it was from 3 videos a month to 2. Now it's going to be 2 videos a month to 1, hopefully longer and more focused videos. It all depends on if I can do as much as I want during the month. I skipped my monthly Tumblr blog last month because depression and no time, and yeah, but this month we'll have a blog post, although a rather small one. I think. I had to pause working on my little short film and comic again because I just don't have the time to do anything right now. Fox and I are very close to moving out together, and I'm so excited for us to have our own spaces. But until that happens, I will unfortunately need to take more time for packing and organizing and working and literally everything else other than my hobbies. I hope you like this longer video because I probably will not do another one of these for a very long time. I had to put it off for a while because it was taking up a lot of brain power and time that I didn't have. I think that's all I have to say for now. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. See you in the next one. Bye.